Hello everyone and welcome. Let's talk about how to use props, staffage, copies, decorations, whatever you want to call it, in exhibition, display and interpretation settings. Because when you want to use copies or props or whatever you want to call it in as part of your storytelling, it's really about creating some storytelling in the detail, in the bigger picture, if you like. And there's so many different ways of doing this, both in exhibitions, but also very much in live interpretation and in outdoor interpretation. And there's so many different perspectives you can gain on the detail of a story, but also on everything from live storytelling to seasonal interpretation and so on. I will be showing you lots of images with examples of how to do this in this video, and I also hope that you want to share your own images and your own experiences here, because there's really a lot that can be done around this and so many brilliant ways of going about it. As always, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel and add your comments. It would be so great to hear from you. So let's dive into this. When using props or staffage in any kind of interpretation or storytelling setting, it's really about creating a holistic experience, but in the detail. So let's look at some examples of how to do this. First of all, consider the small stories within the bigger stories. Now, I have a little bit of a peculiar example here, but it actually illustrates this quite well. This is from a gentleman's room, a billiard room at the Danish Man and Estate Museum, where the room was decorated very much in a early 19th, I think around 1920s or something, setting, with a huge billiard board in the middle of a room and paintings on the wall, and sort of a gentleman's room. And in a small corner there was this little display with, you have a little glass there, I'm guessing some sort of sherry or maybe, and some cigars lying about as if they have just been smoked, or gentlemen sort of grabbing one from time to time in between playing billiard. And it's just a wonderful little way of incorporating a detail in a bigger storytelling that tells you about the use of a room and about what actually went on here. Another thing to consider is how to present more information within a decorated or reconstructed space. So I have another example here from the same museum, actually, the Danish Man and Estate Museum. In their great hall, they had this beautifully decorated table for a wedding that was taking place. There was also actually copies of costumes, the bride and groom in a corner there. And of course, the centerpiece of this room is this beautiful decorated table, flowers and everything. But how do you add more information? And as you can see in the corner there with the red posters, they are kind of put in a corner and a little bit discreet, but there's quite a lot of information there. So they don't really steal the picture from this beautifully decorated table, but there are more information to gain there, and you certainly notice them there. So this is a little bit of a balance between where do you put information so that people notice it, but also how do you make sure that it doesn't really steal the spotlight from your beautiful decoration and from your beautiful setting. Another example is from London Zoo. This was an indoor enclosure with animals from rainforest areas especially. And this was actually a brilliant, simple way as well of including information on rainforest. How do we use the forest? How are things connected? You can see this particular piece of cloth with extra information on it deals with the use of medicine. And how many medicines are based on rainforest ingredients and so on. And this is again a very simple way of adding information to what is essentially the centerpiece, which is of course the animals and what you come to look at. But this is a nice way of actually adding some extra information that most people are actually very interested in. Another thing to consider is how to present surprises, or perhaps in the shape of a different media within a well-known setting or space. Now I have two examples here where screens are used. If you look to the right first, you have an example from the National Maritime Museum where there is a quite traditional display of paintings going on, and then you have a picture frame with a screen. So it looks as if this is just another painting on the wall, but with live painting suddenly, and you can add a lot of information to a screen that you couldn't normally do on, for example, labels or posters or text within an exhibition. The other example, again from the Danish Man and Estate Museum, in a little display of tapestries there, and you have again an old picture frame, but a screen, not a picture or a painting within it, but a screen showing images from the manor house's history and the estate museum's history. And again, a brilliant way of adding a lot of information. So using a new media, but kind of decorating it or putting it in an old-fashioned context here, or within a context that seemed to suit the rest of the room, the rest of the setting. A fun way of actually presenting surprises. This is from a hotel room at a Lego hotel where I was put in a pirate room, and they really go all in. You have to give them that at Lego. And there was a brilliant detail with a Lego spider on the wall. I think this is probably the first time I have been in a room sleeping with a spider and not been afraid. But this was such a brilliant, fun little detail, and you certainly remember it afterwards, these details. So a lot can actually, there's a lot of powerful interpretation really to be said about the detail here. Now consider how to create ambivalence or conflict in visitors by presenting them with a choice. Now here's an example from an interactive art installation called Low Key at Aarhus Art Museum in Denmark, with a Lamborghini, a beautiful car, but you were actually allowed to key it. And I think for many people there is an ambivalence and a bit of a conflict going on here, because you don't really want to ruin such an expensive, beautiful object. And even if you don't particularly like cars, you know that this is a very expensive car, and you could tell if you zoom in on some of the detail that you were kind of creating art with other visitors here, and some had really gone into a lot of detail in keying the car here. But the interesting aspect here was how this provided you with a very intriguing choice, because you actually hesitated a little bit before you started essentially ruining this beautiful object and adding to it and putting your own little artwork on it. But a brilliant way that you certainly remember afterwards on how to include visitors and using objects, and also how objects can change along the way throughout an exhibition period. Consider how to present temporary special events or perhaps anniversaries within your spaces. Here's an example from the National Museums in Greenwich again. A little ship display outside on the grass there, on the lawn, commemorating the little ships of Dunkirk. Now this was 700 private boats that made the journey from England to Dunkirk in France in 1940 and rescued more than 300,000 British and French soldiers trapped on the beaches there. And I don't think a lot of people actually know about this event, but this little display was not there for very long, but very beautiful and sort of fitted in beautifully with those wide buildings in the background and very nicely put up floating boats there. And it certainly attracted a lot of attention. So if you have a special anniversary or a special perhaps historical event that went on and that you want to focus on, and that is in line with what you do at your museum or heritage site, think about ways of making that fit in and how you can put focus on something that perhaps not many people know about. It can also be quite a nice surprising element there. When telling really poignant stories, consider the simplicity and how important it can be to actually make things simple, particularly in poignant storytelling. Now, I have a good example here from a Second World War memorial park in Denmark. This was an execution site where members of the resistance and people considered to be traitors of the Nazi regime were shot and killed. And these three pillars here, or poles, were known in Denmark as the silent pillars or the silent poles. And you would literally tie up members of the resistance and shoot them here. And after the war, the three poles were copied, preserved in bronze. So the poles there now are not the original wooden ones, but copies made in bronze. You can see the slightly green color there, and you can get up close to them. You can see the pistol holes still in them, so they were copied exactly as they looked after the war. And it's very, very simple but incredibly powerful, because you immediately feel what was going on here, and you immediately feel the atmosphere of the space, and the incredible emotion and seriousness around this. And you can see people are still lying sort of flowers and anniversaries and so on in this place. So a very, very powerful way of working with a space where something absolutely horrible happened and took place, and you're standing there now as a visitor looking at the remains or copies of the remains of this. So think about how simple interpretation can sometimes be incredibly powerful. Also consider how to include seasonal celebrations and events. Now, an obvious one here is Christmas. This is from Kronborg Castle in Denmark, where you have this beautiful great hall, and of course a huge Christmas tree in the middle of it attracts a lot of attention, and you can do a lot of events and so on around it. But it doesn't have to be Christmas, it can be Easter or whatever events. So wherever seasonal events sort of fit in, think about how you can work with the atmosphere on that, and how what people associate essentially with the different seasonal events. Also consider how to play with design and lights and shadows. Now here are a few very interesting examples. If you look at the one, the green one there in the middle, this was a little display at the Viking King exhibition in Jelling in Denmark, where you have this raven. So a lot of the Norse mythology on display here, and the shadow that went on here and the shadow games that went on here were really, really interesting, because it's very intriguing and a little bit mysterious. Now the same goes for the bottom one to the right, which was actually a live video projection with a little shadow fight there display at Moesgaard Museum in Denmark. That was again incredibly powerful play of light. So you can't really see the detail, but you can definitely see and sense what's going on. The top picture is from a Sense of Space multi-sensory art installation in London, where they had this hanging garden with lights hanging down, and you could walk around in it. And again, a very simple but very powerful way of playing with lights, with copies and staffage, and with shadows and design here. Finally, consider how to use staff and live interpretation and re-enactment as part of your storytelling here. Now, here are two examples. One to the left, which was an open by night event at Kronborg Castle in Denmark, where old inhabitants of the castle came alive for a night in the shape of ghosts. And the example to the right with Harry Potter at Olney Castle in the north of England, where a lot of the scenes from the Harry Potter movies were shot. So a lot of people actually come for this particular story. But when you do live storytelling and you use actors or reenactors or live interpreters in your storytelling, they kind of become part of your display. And if you like, they become living props because the way they are dressed, the person they are meant to portray and so on, can only really function in this particular setting, in this particular castle or in this particular museum or whatever it is. So they kind of become live props, if you like, and they can really add a very special and memorable layer to the storytelling. So really have a think about how you can work with that, where it fits in, if there are particular events where this work really well. That can be really powerful storytelling as well. So to sum up a little bit here, think about the importance of the detail. So in a fun, playful way, for example, as we saw with the Lego spider on the wall there, sometimes it's really in the detail. Also with the cigarettes there in the gentleman's room. Also the power of simple storytelling, like we saw with the poles or the pillows there at the Second World War execution site. When telling poignant stories, it can really, really be powerful to go simple. Think about how you can create discussion or ambivalence in choice in your visitors. So, for example, with the keyed Lamborghini there, where can we create a little bit of conflict in visitors? Perhaps asking them to do something or be part of something that might create a choice in them or some food for thought in them. Think about how you can play with the atmosphere of lights, shadows, design. Also include seasons or contemporary events or anniversaries, like with the little ship display in Greenwich. So really highlighting an event that perhaps had not really been brought much to attention before, that perhaps not many visitors know an awful lot about. Also think about where and how to include more info. It can be in the shape of screens or different media within a historic setting, but it can also be, for example, just traditional labels or text or images. Where can they fit in when you have a decorated space that you don't really want to steal the attention from? You want people to focus on your decorated space and on, for example, a beautifully decorated party table or something. But how can you add more info to that, and where would it be suitable to add that in? Now, I would really, really love to hear about some of your examples here, because there's so many different ways you can use props, copies and staffage in not just in exhibitions as we saw, but also in outdoor storytelling, in seasonal storytelling, in live interpretation and storytelling, in reenactment and so on. It would be really great to hear about some of your experiences, and also what worked for you and what didn't work and why didn't it work. It would be really interesting to hear about what you think about this, and maybe hear about some of your examples as well. So please do share.